Let me ask you a direct question, and I want you to answer honestly, even if it stings a little. Have you noticed that when your bank account is at zero, you feel desperate, but when you finally manage to save a little money, you feel afraid of losing it, afraid of spending it wrong, afraid of needing to use it, afraid of going back to zero? It sounds contradictory, but many people actually become even more anxious when they move from having absolutely nothing to having something saved. What if I told you this has a much deeper explanation than lack of self-control or lack of financial education? What if the issue isn't how much you earn, but how your brain reacts to money before the age of 35? Maybe you're in that phase right now. You work, you hustle, you try to save a little, but you feel like you're always chasing, always behind. Always with the sense that if one thing goes wrong, everything falls apart. You look ahead and think, am I going to worry about money forever? Is adult life really just this constant tension in the back of my mind? And in the middle of all that anxiety, you hear phrases like invest early, start now, compound interest, financial freedom. But none of that fixes the tight feeling in your chest when the credit card bill hits. What almost nobody explains is that before 35, there's an invisible window, a phase where the decisions you make don't just change your balance, they change how your brain will react to money for the rest of your life. Because up to a certain point, you're in survival mode. Your brain is focused on avoiding immediate pain. It doesn't care about spreadsheets. It wants to avoid embarrassment, avoid collections, avoid swiping your card and having it decline. It wants emotional safety, not annual returns. And here's the paradox no one talks about. Having a little money saved can be emotionally more distressing than having nothing at all. When you have nothing, you already expect the worst. But when you have some money set aside, you start protecting it with fear. You think twice before every decision. You don't feel freedom, you feel heavy responsibility. And that's exactly where most people get stuck. There's a specific moment when your brain stops reacting as if it's running from danger and starts thinking in a rational, strategic.com way. Before that moment, you make decisions out of impulse or fear. After that moment, you start deciding with clarity. And what you need to do before 35 isn't get rich. It's not double your salary. It's not learn 1,000 investments. It's cross that mental threshold. It's move from survival mode into building mode. But that doesn't happen on its own. And if you leave it for later, the pattern gets reinforced. You get used to living under pressure. Anxiety becomes normal. Fear becomes routine. And before you know it, you're 40 and still feel the same insecurity you felt at 25, just with bigger responsibilities. Maybe you're thinking right now, so what exactly do I need to do? Relax. Because before we talk about what to do, we need to face what's really happening with you. Most people under 35 live a silent drama. It's not just about money. It's about comparison. You scroll through social media and see people traveling, buying cars, living alone, investing. It looks like everyone is moving forward except you. You start wondering if you chose the wrong career, if you started too late, if you're falling behind. And that feeling of being behind creates urgency. And urgency creates mistakes. You take on payments you can't really afford. You sign up for financing that's too long. You try to upgrade your lifestyle before you have the foundation. You use your credit card as a bridge to a lifestyle that isn't sustainable yet, and each small decision seems harmless. But together, they create a fragile structure. The problem is that almost no one talks about the emotional fragility behind this. You don't buy something just because you want it. You buy it to feel in control. You finance it to feel like you keeping up. You spend too easy a hard day. And then the guilt comes. And guilt wears you down, and mental exhaustion reduces your ability to think long term. Before 35, the biggest mistake isn't earning little. It's not building structure. Structure isn't glamorous. Structure is having enough set aside to say, I can handle this when something goes wrong. Structure is not relying on your credit limit as a plan B. Structure is having at least minimal predictability. But here comes an uncomfortable truth. You don't build structure with willpower. You build it with a system. And most people are trying to solve a structural problem with temporary motivation. They start excited, save for 1 month, quit the next, try again, then stop. That doesn't change the survival mindset. What needs to happen before 35 is the creation of a foundation that changes your automatic behavior. You need to take financial decisions out of the emotional field and move them into the routine field. Because as long as every month feels like a battle, you'll stay exhausted. Maybe you've felt this before. The exhaustion isn't physical, it's mental. It's opening your banking app and feeling a weight. It's avoiding your statement. It's postponing, organizing your bills. It's promising next month will be different. This cycle drains your energy. And when your energy runs out, you go back to the easiest pattern, which is usually the most expensive. So what really changes the game before 35? It's not the perfect investment. It's reaching the minimum amount that gives you real peace of mind. There's a number that, once reached, makes your brain relax. Not because you're rich, but because you know an unexpected expense won't destroy you. And here's the shift most people don't understand. Your first goal isn't to grow money. It's to buy peace of mind. It's to build an emergency fund that isn't meant to generate returns. It's meant to protect you from yourself when you're tired, anxious, or pressured. When you have that base, something changes. You turn down bad debt more easily. You negotiate better. You choose calmly. You don't accept just any offer because you're desperate. And this shift seems small, but it changes your entire trajectory. Before 35, you still have room for error. You can adjust course, change fields, test pads. After that, responsibilities usually increase. Kids, mortgages, aging parents, bigger commitments. If you enter that phase still in survival mode, the pressure multiplies. But if you enter with a minimal structure, life doesn't become perfect, it becomes manageable. And that word is powerful, manageable. Problems stop being threats and become logistical issues. Something broke, fix it. Lost income, adjust. An opportunity shows up, take it. Your brain can think because it's not in panic mode. Now, let me challenge you again. If you keep living exactly the way you are today, financially speaking, where will you be at 35? With the same anxiety, the same revolving debt, the same feeling of always starting from zero. That question is uncomfortable because deep down, time moves fast, and what needs to be done isn't complicated, but it requires a decision. You need to choose that the next few years won't be about impressing anyone. They'll be about building an invisible foundation. You need to accept that maybe your lifestyle won't increase right now. Maybe you won't upgrade your car anytime soon. Maybe you'll say no more than you'd like, but every no now buys a much bigger yes later. Money before 35 isn't about luxury. It's about future freedom. It's about reducing the number of bad decisions you'll be forced to make because you had no option. Because almost every major financial mistake starts with a simple sentence. I didn't have a choice. When you build a foundation, you create choice. And choice changes everything. But here comes something even deeper. What you need to do before 35 isn't just save money. It's change your financial identity. As long as you see yourself as someone who never manages to save, you'll keep proving that to yourself. As long as you see yourself as bad with money, your behavior will follow that narrative. The change starts when you decide you're the kind of person who builds security. Even if you don't have it yet. Even if you start small, identity comes before results. And every small action reinforces this new version of you. Maybe you're waiting for a big raise to start, or waiting to pay everything off before organizing, or waiting for extra money to invest. But the truth is, people who wait for the perfect scenario usually reach 35 still waiting. What transforms your financial life isn't intensity. It's consistency, it's automation, it's invisible, it's boring at first, but it's freeing later. And I know part of you might be thinking, but my reality is hard. I don't earn much. My bills are already tight. I'm not going to romanticize that. It is hard, but that's exactly why structure is even more urgent. Because if you live on the edge, you can't afford to live without a safety net. Before 35, you need to make 3 moves that almost nobody prioritizes. Reduce your fixed costs as much as possible, build a reserve that covers months of your life, and develop a skill that increases your income in the medium term. It's not about doing everything at once in a chaotic way. It's about organizing these pillars with calm and discipline. High fixed costs are an invisible prison. The higher they are, the less freedom you have. Your reserve is your mental shield, and your skill is your growth engine. Without these 3, you live reacting. With them, you start acting. And maybe most importantly, you need to stop using money as emotional anesthesia. Because as long as consumption is your way of easing frustration, your foundation will never solidify. That requires maturity. It requires facing discomfort without escaping into quick purchases. Before 35, you're still forming your definitive pattern. The way you handle salary, raises, bonuses, debt, all of that becomes your normal. If your normal is spending everything you earn, any raise just increases your spending standard. If your normal is saving a portion before touching the rest, any raise accelerates your building. See how it's not about luck? It's about pattern. And maybe the most important question of all is, do you want to keep surviving or do you want to start building? Because surviving is exhausting. Building is hard at first, but it creates stability later. These early adult years aren't about showing results to the world. They're about preparing the ground, because when the foundation is ready, growth stops being a distant dream and becomes a natural consequence. There's a silent mistake many people make between their 20s and 30s, and they only realize it too late. They increase their income a little and immediately upgrade their lifestyle. Not because irresponsible, but because they're tired of going without. Tired of feeling behind, tired of feeling smaller. So they upgrade their phone, upgrade their car, move somewhere more expensive, take on new payments, and without realizing it, raise their fixed costs. It looks like progress, but in reality, they've just increased the pressure. And here's the point. Almost no one has the courage to say, before 35, you need to learn how to sustain a lifestyle below what you can afford. That's not about living poorly. It's about living strategically, because every dollar you turn into a fixed cost becomes a monthly obligation. And monthly obligations steal mental freedom. Have you noticed how different it feels to spend on something one time versus committing to a bill that follows you for years? Fixed expenses create constant tension. Even if you're paying them, they're reminding you that you have to keep running. When fixed costs get too high, any setback becomes a threat, and your brain goes back to survival mode. If you want to stop worrying about money forever, you need to understand that peace doesn't come from earning a lot. It comes from needing less to sustain yourself. That completely changes the logic, because if you need a high salary just to maintain the basics, you'll always depend on external stability. And external stability is rarely under your control. Before 35, you have a massive advantage. Time to build structure before responsibilities become huge. But time passes fast. And if you don't use these years to reduce vulnerability, you might spend the next 20 correcting what could have been prevented. Now, I want you to imagine two scenarios. In the first, you reach 35 with controlled debt, a solid reserve that covers several months of your life, fixed costs under control, and at least one skill that allows you to increase your income when needed. You're not a millionaire, but you sleep peacefully. You don't feel that knot in your stomach at the end of every month. You don't rely on your credit limit as plan B problems exist, but they heave. In the second scenario, you reach 35 with long-term payments, little or no reserve, a lifestyle too expensive for your real income, and a profession that pays enough to survive but not to grow. You wake up already thinking about bills. You avoid checking your statements. You feel ashamed talking about money. You live in constant tension that no one sees, but that follows you every day. Which of these scenarios is closer to your current path? And there's no point lying to yourself. The path you're on today is pointing somewhere. Financial life doesn't change by accident. It changes through repeated decisions. Now, let me show you what really needs to happen before 35 to change that destination. First, you need to eliminate any high-interest debt. It doesn't matter if it seems small. High interest is like an invisible leak. You work, you earn, but part of it quietly disappears. And the worst part isn't the money that leaves. It's the feeling of constantly putting out fires. Active debt keeps your brain on alert, and a brain on alert makes bad decisions. Second, you need to build a reserve that covers real months of your life. I'm not talking about a symbolic amount. I'm talking about a number that, if you lose income for a few months, you can breathe. That completely changes your posture. You negotiate better at work. You say no to bad offers. You choose instead of accepting anything. Third, you need to develop a skill that increases your earning capacity in the medium term, because just cutting expenses doesn't build a future. Reducing costs protects you. Increasing income expands you, and that skill doesn't have to be glamorous. It can be practical, direct, something the market pays for. The mistake is thinking your current salary is fixed forever. Fourth, You need to automate whatever you can, because relying on motivation is fragile. Motivation fluctuates. You get tired, problems show up. But when you create a system where part of your money goes straight to your reserve before you touch it, you stop negotiating with yourself every month. You remove emotion from the decision. See how this is much more psychological than mathematical? Most people know they should save. They know they should avoid debt. They know they should plan. The problem was never information. The problem is that living under pressure reduces your ability to act strategically. And here's an uncomfortable truth. If you don't do this before 35, it's not impossible later, but it will be much heavier because responsibilities grow, and reorganizing a life full of fixed commitments is harder than organizing when you still have flexibility. Maybe you're waiting to feel ready to start, but no one feels ready. You start insecure. You start small. The important thing is to start while you can still build a foundation without carrying a massive weight on your back. There's also a point almost no one talks about. The kind of people you surround yourself with strongly influences your financial life. If your circle normalizes permanent debt, impulsive spending, and having no savings, you'll think that's standard. And the standard becomes comfortable even if it's harmful. Before 35, you need to choose better references, not to compete, but to raise your level of awareness. And here's something even deeper. Money isn't just about bills. It's about dignity. It's about not feeling small in the face of an unexpected expense. It's about not depending on favors to solve something basic. It's about having autonomy. When you build a foundation, you gain something no one can take from you. Inner peace. Even if the world becomes unstable, you have margin, and margin is power. Now let me tell you something. That might sting a little. If you keep using every raise to upgrade your lifestyle, you might double your income and still feel the same anxiety. Because the worry isn't about the absolute amount. It's about the gap between what you earn and what you need to maintain your life. The people who stop worrying about money aren't the ones who earn insanely high incomes. They're the ones who organize their structure intelligently and live below their means. That creates surplus. And surplus creates freedom. Before 35, you're deciding whether you'll live reacting to money or commanding it. You're deciding whether you'll depend on luck or structure. You're deciding between monthly adrenaline and progressive stability. And here's the real transformation. When you build this foundation, you stop thinking about money all the time. It stops being a constant weight. It becomes a tool. You start using money to solve problems, not create more. Imagine waking up without that automatic tension of wondering if it will work out. Imagine not feeling guilty every time you spend on something necessary. Imagine knowing that if something happens, you can handle it. That's not luxury. That's built structure. And that construction starts long before 35. If this video made sense to you, if at any point you saw yourself in this, I want you to do two things right now. First, hit the like button because that helps this content reach more people who are living this silent anxiety. Second, subscribe to the channel because here we talk about money in a real way, no fantasy, and no magical promises. And I want to ask you something simple. Comment the word focus below. If you made it to the end, comment foundation. So I know you don't want to live in survival mode anymore and that you've decided to truly start building, because at the end of the day, what you need to do before 35 to never worry about money again isn't get rich. It's build enough foundation so that money stops being a threat and starts being a tool. And that decision starts now.